we're basically on page Lamed Hey Amud Base 35b, and we were discussing all the cases of um, where the Mishnah had said you're not allowed to use certain things. Some are kosher after the fact, but you still should not have used them. And for an esrog, we're dealing with the issues with the esrogim. We talked about demai and esrog. That's demai. Demai means that supposed to be it's not supposed to be benefited from because you can't eat it, you can't you benefit from it because it might not have had the miser removed from it, the different misers, different tithings that are supposed to be removed from it, and so you shouldn't use. So the halacha was that if you did use the mai, it is going to be kosher, and the reason the Gemara deals with why is it, at least according to Beis Hill, says, let's see, Shal Demai Beis Shammai Paislan Beis Hill Machshirin. Beis Hillel allows you to use it. Beis Shammai says no, it's puzzle, it's invalid. So what's the problem? Why would it be invalid to use Demai, and why does Beis Hillel say it's kosher? And on that, the Gemara had said that there is the fact that Demai is this. We're not sure if it was tithe. So Beis Hillel holds that there are exemptions, that you can use such food items in certain scenarios. For certain people, poor people are allowed to have demai, and achsanya generally, achsanya here means the army. The army would be exempt, would be permissible to have demai, and and uh, and therefore, because you could make yourself poor at any given moment by just making your possessions ownerless, so that would be a reason why you would be eligible yourself to use this esrog. It has a heter achila. It's considered that you own it because you could eat it, and it's you could do anything with it because it's yours. It has a heter achila, it has a din mammon. You could make yourself poor, and therefore it would be fine. Um, the Beis Shammai disagrees with that. Beis Shammai says, "Ein ma'achilen asaniyim noyim demai." You're not allowed to use it, and benefit from it, and eat, feed the poor people with demai. But Beis Hillel holds you're allowed to. So that would be the reason for an esrog of demai. The Taisus interestingly brings that there's a discussion in Yushalmi. What does it mean, these achsanoyim, these achsanya, this army? Are they Jewish or are they goyim? And it brings a machlokes over there. Also, who are the poor people? Are the poor people chaverim, like scholars, or are they amei haaretz? Who are you allowed to feed? So he brings the Yushalmi that talks about the two different opinions. Well, basically, even if the achsanoyim are goyim, you still would need this heter to feed them this type of demai. Why? A goy doesn't have any rules about eating anything. Like they're allowed to eat treif. They don't have to take miser. So what's the reason why you wouldn't be allowed to feed a goy an achsanya? The army, the goyish army came into town, and you're gonna feed them demai. What's the big deal? It's they're goyim. They're eating demai. They're allowed to eat things that aren't, that's not your issue. The thing is that you're not allowed to pay up a loan with demai, with produce that wasn't tithed, possibly. And here you're basically paying up a loan because you're obligated to feed them. According to the rules of the country, you have to feed the army comes to your town. Certain times in the olden days, they would be obligated to feed the army. So because of that, there's reason that you would be basically paying up an obligation with demai, and that would not be acceptable. And that would be the reason why, even if you want to say it's talking about goyim, it could be a problem. You're nana by paying up your responsibility with this demai. So can a goy eat demai? Yeah, but are you allowed to pay? Are you allowed to give him demai by paying up your obligation? That's a problem. So that would be the mean. That would be that opinion of Tosfos that he says that that's what it's referring to. It's interesting because the Rambam in Pirish HaMishnayos says achsanya means like we commonly translate achsanya. Achsanya means guests. So the Rambam holds that when you're feeding guests, you could be makel on because you're it's a chivas of the mitzvah of having guests. The rabbis didn't obligate you to be extra careful. It's an interesting understanding. In other words, different than the common understanding over here that poor people can have it, and chayoloisov, the army. So the Rambam is letting it means you have guests. You could be, you didn't, you have demai. So the reason why you could be makel, of course, is because according to the letter of the law, we assume they did take meiser. We assume even the amei haaretz, even those that are not scrupulous with keeping all the laws, but nevertheless, we do assume they did take meiser because the roiv majority do take meiser. And there are a minority that don't. You don't have to rely on them. But the rabbis wanted to be extra careful, extra strict. But in the case where you're inviting guests, the rabbis didn't want to burden you. And therefore, you're having guests. You have to understand the olden days, it wasn't easy to have guests. Nowadays, we have abundance and wealth, like Baruch Hashem. But in the olden days, another story. So there, the rabbi, according to the Rambam, the rabbis weren't machmer on you. Yes, David.
Yeah, the obligation to feed the army, is that an obligation on the town, or is it an obligation on the individual?
What would
that matter?
What do you mean the town? The government? The town meaning the government? What do you mean by saying the town? I would see it as the same thing, unless you mean the government of each town, or the people. What do you mean by the town?
The people as opposed to the individual.
Well, how is a person not an individual? Well, I don't get it.
I don't know if there's a difference. Yeah, that's why I was asking also if there's a difference.
Yeah, I'm not sure how you could differentiate it, but maybe if you would say that it's an obligation on the government of each town, then maybe maybe it's different. Maybe you could give them because it's not your obligation to feed them. You want to go and give them demai. Maybe you could, that would be more of a bigger that would be more of a reason why. In other words, my point is, Beis Hillel holds you're allowed to feed achsana. You could feed someone. You could feed them demai. Now, you could feed them demai.
In today's terms, make it illegal immigrants. No, Emes, you're paying your taxes, so you have to make your contribution.
Right. Now, what I'm thinking is this: there's a machloikus over here. Some say that it means the goyim, achsanya, and some say it means the yidden. What would be the reason why the yidden you could be machilan masachsan noyim demai? It's saying the yidden because the reason would be that that if it was goyim, maybe we aren't going to be lenient for them, or maybe you could say it's more lenient. In other words, the chiddush. You have to understand the Yerushalmi. It seems like there might be two ways to learn the Yerushalmi. Why? What is this argument about? That if it's talking about, so let's talk about the case of the chaverim. So the rabbi that says in the Yerushalmi that it means the chaverim, that even the scholars you're allowed to feed demai. Why would you be allowed to feed demai to the scholars? So according to that opinion, in other words, what about the amei haaretz? So it would seem that opinion holds for sure you could feed amei haaretz demai. But even scholars, you're allowed to feed them demai. You could feed them this, even scholars. The other opinion says, no, only amei haaretz. But scholars, you would not be allowed to feed demai. Scholars can't. So the same thing would apply maybe to the.
Why? Finish the sentence.
Why would that be? Because a scholar wants
you don't
himself
want to give
to be
truma by accident.
he wants to be extra machmir. You can't go and feed him something that he really would not. It's not appropriate to feed him something that maybe he himself would be machmir on, would normally not want to eat. So there could be reason not to feed him demai. That's what it would seem. So now let's take that same understanding to the next case. So if you're allowed to feed the scholars the demai, you're also allowed to feed the achsanya demai. Now, if it means it means even the Yidden, you're allowed to feed the Achsanya Yidden, the Jewish army, you're allowed to feed them demai. What would the law be with a non-Jewish army? For sure you could feed them demai. Even the Jewish army you're allowed to feed demai. So what about the other opinion? The other opinion would say that the case is talking about the Goyim and the Amei Haaretz. In other words, that you're allowed to feed poor people that are Amei Haaretz demai. Why are you allowed to feed Amei Haaretz? Anyway, not as care. Well, you don't have to be so machmer for them. Anyway, ignorant, and the halacha is it's kosher. You can feed it to them. So what would be that by the Goyim? The Goyim would also be the same thing. Why you can feed it to them, even though you're not supposed to benefit from something that wasn't, you didn't have meiser taken from it. Nevertheless, the rabbis weren't machmir here, and you can rely on the letter of the law, and therefore it's not a problem. But what about if it was Jewish army, and what about if it was chaverim? Chaverim, you're not allowed to feed them. You wouldn't be allowed to feed them demai, according to this opinion in Yerushalmi. And what about the Jewish army? The Jewish army also, you wouldn't be allowed to feed them demai. It's only because they're goyim. Okay, so now we have the case. We have the understanding.
Why Jewish Amei Haaretz? It's allowed to give you. You wouldn't be say Amei Haaretz. You could give them not kosher food.
It's not non-kosher. This, according to the letter of the law, it's 100% kosher. We follow Roiv. The rabbis wanted us to be extra machmir. Now, according to the regular halacha, this should be fine. Demai is like an extra stringency, which means we know that it's really okay. You're allowed to rely on majority, and it's okay. But the rabbis wanted us to be machmir in this case, and they prohibited regular scenarios from demai. So here there's a leniency. Now, Beis Shammai doesn't buy into this. So Beis Shammai holds that you can't do this. You can't feed other people. You can't eat demai. The rabbis made it more like a blanket statement. But according to Beis Hillel, you basically can feed goyim demai, and you could feed Amei Haaretz demai according to everyone. The question would be, what about Talmidei Chachamim and what about Yidden that are in the army? Now, if the Yidden in the army are Amei Haaretz, then for sure you could feed them demai, but because they're Amei Haaretz, right? But if they're not, the question is maybe if they're Yidden, they might be Talmidei Chachamim, they might be scholars. I'm in the middle of teaching. What? No. So please close the door. So the thing is that that must be talking about that there might be Yidden in the Jewish army. There might be scholars in the Jewish army. And if there are scholars in the Jewish army, then you would have a problem. So anyway, so bottom line is that that according to Beis Hillel, it's okay. Comes out that it's okay. However, according to Beis Shammai, it's a problem. Now, the question that David is asking is, what about if it's an obligation on the city? It's not an obligation on the city. There might be more of a leniency. You're not paying up your debt, because if it's only obligation on the government, and you want to go and say, oh, if the army wants to eat from this, they can. So going to be Shammai, you might find a leniency there, that it's not an you're not paying up your debt because you're not obligated to feed them, and that would be they're just coming and eating demai. So maybe it's not a problem. You get what I'm saying, like David? So it could be that would be a different type of scenario. Here we're talking about where it's an obligation on the individual. It's an obligation on the individual, then you're paying up your debt. You get what I'm saying? If it's not an obligation on you, you're just going the kindness of your heart and saying, well, the city has to pay. I'm offering them, if they want. So then it's not a personal obligation. It wouldn't be. It would seem that could be a leniency there. You're just like you're feeding Amei Haaretz demai. You could feed these goyim, this army demai. Okay. Anyway, so So getting back to the other Gemaras that we were learning. So we spoke about Demai and we spoke about Meiser Sheni. Meiser Sheni, we said that the thing is that lechatchila you shouldn't use an esrog of Meiser Sheni. If you did, it's kosher. And that was very similar to an esrog that's truma tahira. Lechatchila you shouldn't use it, but if you did, it is kosher. So you have an esrog of truma and an esrog of Meiser Sheni. They both seem to have the same rule. It's preferable not to use it. An esrog of Meiser Sheni, preferable not to use it for preferable not to use it for your mitzvah of the Daled Minim. If you did, it's kosher. Now, with Meiser Sheni, it got a little tricky. Why was it more tricky with Meiser Sheni? Because with Meiser Sheni, the second tithing, which you eat in Yerushalayim, if the esrog is for Meiser Sheni, there is an opinion that Meiser Sheni is called Mammon Gavoya. It's called Hashem's. And there it gets tricky. How do you fulfill the mitzvah with Hashem's esrog? It's not your esrog. You're supposed to own the esrog according to the well-known halacha that on the first day of Sukkot and on outside of Israel, possibly on the second day as well, it needs to be lachem. It has to be yours. And so how can you fulfill the mitzvah on an esrog that's mammon gavoya? So we struggled with it.
Could you come here for a minute?
Yes, it's coming now.
And the understanding we had was, well, there are two opinions. One is that the fact that you can eat it makes it that it's considered yours, together with the fact maybe that if someone steals it from you, he has to pay you back. There is some element of being yours, even though it's mammon gavoya. But the fact that you could eat it and someone steals it from you could be considered yours. The other way of understanding it is that you're right. It's mammon gavoya, and it's Hashem's. And you can't, according to Reb Meir, you actually can't fulfill the mitzvah with an esrog of Meiser Sheni. And the only way the Mishnah says that it is allowed after the fact you fulfill the mitzvah is only according to the other opinion of the rabbis, that it's called mammon hedyet, that it's called yours. So in the Meiser Sheni law, it was a little tricky, that only if you understand it one way will the law of the Mishnah fit everyone's view, even Reb Meir's view that says it's Hashem's money. Meiser Sheni is considered Hashem's money. There is a way to consider it still yours, even though we're calling it Hashem's, but it could also be considered yours. The fact that you have a heter achila, and I added the fact that it's going to be, I included this idea that I saw brought down in one of the commentaries, brings this down, that it's also fact that it's going to be that if someone steals it from you, they got to pay you back. So there has some element of it being yours as well. So according to that way of learning, then the Mishnah fits, even though it has to be yours. You did it with the Meiser Sheni esrog. It's considered yours, even though it's also considered Hashem's, according to Reb Meir. But it's considered yours. You fulfill the mitzvah. If you learn it the other way, that you have to have a value in it. It has to have a certain value. So Meiser Sheni esrog, you can't, if it's called Hashem's, it doesn't have a din mammon to you. You don't have it doesn't have a monetary value to you, and because of that,
I took out the hard eggs.
So now the software, okay, so where the software?
I don't know where the eggs are, and I didn't put them in.
Oh, okay.
mute everyone. Let's go.
Never put in the software.
Okay, so because it doesn't have a monetary value, so therefore, according to Reb Meir, it's called mammon gavaya. It doesn't have a din mammon. You can't really do things with it. Like, for example, could you be makadesh and isha with this Meiser Sheni? According to Reb Meir, no, it's not. It doesn't have a din mammon. It doesn't have a monetary value to it, and therefore, it's not considered yours. It's considered Hashem's only. So according to that understanding, the Mishnah will only fit with the rabbi's view, not with Reb Meir's view. So again, so that was the one small difference between esrog of Truma Tahira and an esrog of Meiser Sheni. According to by Truma Tahira, everyone can, you after the fact, if you used an esrog of Truma Tahira, it's kosher. According to everyone. It has a din mamain, has a din, has a heter achila. A kohen can eat it. A kohen could be mekadesh an isha with it, and even a Yisrael, if a kohen gave it to a Yisrael, there's a way that he could be mekadesh an isha with it. And therefore, it would be considered yours. Esrog of an esrog of truma tahira is kosher according to everyone. Esrog of Meiser Sheni is another story. An esrog of Meiser Sheni is another story. It depends on how you learn. Now, what about using it in the first place? So both of them, we said you're not allowed to do in the first place. What was the reason? Esrog of Truma Tahira and an esrog of Meiser Sheni had the same reasons. Number one, you're being machshirit l'kabel tuma. You're making it susceptible to be makabel tuma because it's getting wet. When it touches the lulav, it becomes wet. And therefore, it becomes susceptible to tuma. And if it's truma, you're not allowed to make it susceptible to tuma. If it's Meiser Sheni, the same thing. So it's machshirit l'kabel tuma. And we said the same thing about the other opinion. It also fits with both, that it's mafsido. At Truma Tahira, you can't be mafsid, you can't cause it to get ruined, and every time you touch it, you're ruining it. Meiser Sheni is the same thing, that every time you're ruining it, every time you're touching it, you're ruining it, and therefore we don't want you to use it in the first place for the mitzvah of the Daled Minim.
Rabbi.
Yes, David.
I'm missing something. You keep on saying Meiser Sheni. What about Meiser Rishon?
So Meiser Rishon is a tithe that is given to the Levi, and Meiser Rishon basically is owned by the Levi, and there's no issue with ruining it or with being machshiret l'kabel tuma. It doesn't have a holiness to it. Meiser Sheni and Truma have a certain holiness to it. There's laws about not causing it to become tamei. So Meiser Rishon doesn't have that issue. Meiser Rishon becomes the property of the Levi. It's like payment to the Levi for his service in the temple. And
yeah, so what happens if it's Meiser Rishon and it hasn't been given yet, but you're using it for Daled Minim?
So that's like a side issue about if it's here we have additional issues by these other two cases. The issues here is that the issues here that we're dealing with more is not using it in the first place because you're machshiret l'kabel tuma, you're mafsid it. Now regarding owning it, so really it boils down to how you understand the case of the truth. In other words, to answer your question, there is a way of learning our Gemara that it's talking about the kohen is using it for his esrog. So if you want to contrast that with Meiser Rishon, it would mean that the Levi is using it. If the Levi is using it, similar to the kohen using it, that would not be a problem after the fact. You get what I'm saying? The kohen, this is his object. He's allowed to use it. He after the fact, if he did it, I mean, he fulfilled the mitzvah. Again,
No, I'm talking about I'm talking about the non-kohen.
Okay, so the way of learning the Gemara on a simple level would be we're talking about a kohen. There's one way of learning this Gemara that is talking about the kohen using an esrog of truma. If you learn it that way, then the case that you're comparing it to is the esrog of Meiser Rishon, which would be the comparable case would be the Levi who received it wants to use it as a esrog. So if you learn the Gemara that way, there's absolutely no reason why the Mishnah should mention a case of the Meiser Rishon. Again, because Meiser Rishon doesn't have holiness, so there's no issue there's no issue. Of course, it's his, it's the Levi's, and there's no reason why he can't use it for the mitzvah. Now, if you want to take it the other way, if you want to learn the Gemara the other way, that's where maybe your question could begin. Why? Because the Meiser Rishon case is not an issue of being machshirit lekabel tuma. It's not an issue of mafsidit. You don't have those issues. It doesn't have holiness to it. But you're asking, what about owning it? So the fact that, however you're learning, that we're talking about an Israelite, under the way of learning that the Israelite is using a truma esrog, and it says it's kosher. So would the same thing apply to Meiser Rishon? You have Meiser Rishon of a Levi. You didn't give it to him yet, and you want to know, would you be able to use that for? Could you consider it yours? You're supposed to give it to the Levi, but you didn't give it to him yet. So seemingly they're one of the Svarim, Rashi says Yeshba heter achila, that the Yisrael could fulfill the mitzvah of Esrog if he buys it from a kohen, and he could, and if he buys it from a kohen, he could fulfill the mitzvah by because he's able to give it to his son-in-law. But so Rashi's way of reading it seems to be a case specifically of a Yisrael, not that he didn't give it to the kohen yet, but that he is receiving it from a kohen. So if you want to compare that way of learning with Meiser Rishon, it would mean that you bought Meiser Rishon from a Levi. If that's true, then in such a case as well, you don't have a problem because it's yours and there's no issue whatsoever. Now, the only issue that you'll come to is, how about the other way of learning? That a Yisrael didn't give it to the kohen yet. And he didn't give it to the kohen yet. There's an option. Someone could give him a coin and say, give this to my son-in-law, the kohen, and with that, it's considered yours. So the same thing would seemingly apply to Meiser Rishon, that you would be able to do the same thing according to that understanding. It's from a sefer of, it's called Reishis Bikurim. He wants to say that would be acceptable, and therefore you would be able to fulfill the mitzvah, could be considered yours, because you would be able to receive money in order to give it to a certain person. And so that could be considered that it's yours. Of course, it's a topic of discussion. The question would be, maybe you could consider it yours because you could feed it to a Levi, and so that's considered yours as well. There's definitely room to say that you fulfilled the mitzvah, but I think the reason why the Gemara doesn't make a big deal out of it is because it doesn't have kedusha to it, and so it's less of an issue than the other cases. The other cases, we brought out these two ideas of machshir lekabel tuma and mafsidit. So because this doesn't have those issues, I think that's why the Gemara doesn't, the Mishnah doesn't deal with Meiser Rishon. And if you learn the Gemara the way the Meiri learned it, or the Ra'ah, that it was only talking about a kohen, then it totally doesn't fit in. Does that answer your question, David?
I guess so. I was talking
All
about
I did for you was I divided it up, your question, according to each of the ways of learning the Gemara. Each way of learning the Gemara, you got to answer it. So
yeah.
each way that you follow the Gemara, according to this way, it would be exactly the same as Truma. According to this, you know what I mean? Each way, it'll the question will be answered as to what the halacha will be.
It's like if a guy has $100 and $10, or the guy has $1,000 and $100 is supposed to be Meiser, but before he gives the Meiser, in the meantime, he borrows the $100 and buys an esrog with it. So he never gave the Meiser. He used the Meiser to buy his own personal esrog.
Yeah. Well, that wouldn't be the case. The case, because you're not supposed to. You can't switch it. The idea of redeeming is applicable to Meiser Sheni. Meiser Rishon is you actually hand the Meiser over to the Levi, And so the case would be where you have esrogim that are mice that are out of the 100, you have 10 esrogim that are miser. You want to use one of them for your mitzvah. I understand the case, right? So it's very understandable what the case is. The question is, could it be considered yours? Is it lochem? Is it yours until you give it to the, you can't eat it, right? So could it be considered yours? It's the
No,
Levi's. It's stealing.
I'm not
You're
saying. I'm not
basically
saying that.
stealing. It's his.
I'm
It's
not
his,
saying.
his
I'm not.
possession.
I'm not saying that the esrog is miser. I'm saying that the money that he used to buy the esrog was miser.
Oh, you're talking about from you made $100,000 this year, and you have you're giving away 10,000 to tzedakah. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah, where the guy had $1,000
Oh,
and he's giving away
so it's not for the
$100 to
Levi.
miser, but he
Oh,
didn't.
not
But he
for the
didn't take.
Levi. You're talking about to tzedakah. You're supposed to give meiser to tzedakah. You want to know
Right.
if you use money from your meiser, is that considered is that acceptable? So the
No,
halacha
I didn't.
is
I wasn't asking that. I was saying that of course, I don't. Of course, it's not acceptable. I'm wondering why they're not mentioning Meiser Rishon in the beginning. I thought
okay.
that they were
So
talking about
two
the
things.
idea of using your money, Meiser money, to buy an
Uh,
esrog.
okay, so two things. First of all, we don't call that meiser rishon. What you're talking about is meiser ksafim. It's meiser, not called meiser rishon. Meiser rishon goes to the Levi. Okay, Meiser on your when you make $100,000 a year and you give 10,000 to tzedakah, that's called Meiser Ksafim. The term Meiser Rishon is used for produce that
Oh,
goes to the
okay.
Levi. Okay, so that's called Meiser Ksafim. That's number one. And number two, the law is that your charity money, your tzedakah money, you're not allowed to fulfill an obligation with it. So you definitely can't go and buy an esrog with Meiser money, because your Meiser money is not allowed to be used to fulfill obligations. However, there might be a heter to use your Meiser money. I have to look into this, but there might be a heter to use it if you want to buy a beautiful esrog. So you use your regular money for the simple kosher esrog, regular kosher esrog, $50, maybe get a kosher esrog. And then you say, and I want to add $100 on top of it from my Meiser money to get a beautiful esrog. That might be allowed. I have to look into that and see if that's okay. There might be a heter to do something like that.
Or using your Meiser money to buy an esrog that you use for Mitzrayim.
Right. Well, that would be another story. Right. That would be that is your tzedakah. Its own. It's that's I don't see how that could be a problem, right? But for you to fulfill your mitzvah, that would be problematic. But to use it maybe to buy an extra Mohuder Esrog, that might be acceptable. Again, I have to look up and see. Okay. Yeah. All right. So getting back to the Gemara that we learned, an Esrog of Meiser Sheni. Yeah. Okay. So that basically covers Friday's Gemara. Okay. So let's continue. Also Chazazis. We're up to the new Gemara of also Chazazis, which is maybe about 15 lines from the bottom of the page on 35b. 35b, 15 lines from the bottom of the page. Also Chazazis, if a blister grew on your esrog. Avram, do you have the place? David, you want to tell us what page it is in the Steinsaltz? Also Chazazis.
It's 175.
Okay. Amar Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda says. So what did the Mishnah say? The Mishnah said that also Chazazis, that if there's a blister on the esrog, if it's on majority, it says it's puzzle, it's invalid. And then, interestingly enough, the Mishnah then said the opposite. The flip side of that is if it's on the minority, that it's going to be kosher, right? That was the Mishnah on 34b. It said, oh, chazazos, if it's on majority, it is invalid. And then it mentioned if it's on miyutoi, on minority, it's going to be kosher. Okay, so the Gemara says, Rav Chizda says, this thing, Rabbeinu Hagadol Amar, Rav, the great master, said. And then he adds, and we've seen this before, Hamakom yeh be'ezroi. Hashem should help him. Seems like he's maybe wants to honor his the great rabbi, and he's saying like a bracha, like almost like shlita or soll sein gesund, he's giving a bracha to him that Rav, the great Rav, Hamakom yeh be'ezroi, Hashem should help him. Hashem should be to his Ezer, to his be a help. To Hashem should I guess support him. Hashem should sustain him. Be'ezroi, help him. So he's giving a little bracha to him. That Rav said the following statement: Loishanu ela b'makom echad. We only learned this law that the esrog is invalid if it has this majority. A blister on majority is if it's in one place on the esrog, which means that you could have a few. It doesn't mean one. There may be a few blisters, but they're all in one place. That would be a problem. Aval, but b'shnayim u'shloisha makaymis, if there is blisters in 2 or 3 places on the esrog, then it'll be kosher. So the only problem is if it's all in one place, but if it's on different places, then it's going to be kosher. The Gemara asks, Amalei Rava. Rava asks, Adrab, the opposite. If you have it in a few places, Havalei Kemanumar, it's considered like a spotted, speckled esrog. And puzzle, it should be invalid. So how could you tell me that it's better if it's in 2 or 3 places than if it's in one place? If it's in 2 or 3 places, it makes it even worse. So the Gemara says, you know what? It must be the exact opposite that we're saying. Ella idmar aseifa idmar. It must be that Rav said this. The Gemara says it must be that Rav's statement, if it was said, it must have been said on the second half of the Mishnah, not on the first half of the Mishnah. Not on the first statement that it talks about the chazazis, but on the second statement that it talks about chazazis. Again, the Gemara, the Mishnah mentioned chazazis twice. It mentioned if the chazazis is on the majority, it's invalid. And if it's on the minority, it is valid. So let's switch the statement of Rav that talked about a difference between one place, one area of the esrog, and 2 or 3 areas of the esrog. Let's take that statement and apply it to the other place in the Mishnah where it talks about chazazis. It's the Seifa, the end of the Mishnah, where it says al miyutai, that if a chazazis, if you have blister or blisters on a minority of the esrog, then the Mishnah said kosher, then it's kosher. And on this, Amar Rav Chizda says, this, our great rabbi, which is Rav, Rav had said, and Hashem should help him, that he said the following statement, Loishanu, it wasn't taught that it's going to be kosher if you have chazazis on a minority, ela b'makam echad, only when it's in one place of the esrog, you have these blisters. Aval b'shnayim u'shloisha makaymis, but if you have them on 2 or 3 places, havalei kemenumar upasul, that even though it's on a minority of the esrog, but because you have it in a few places, it is going to be invalid because of menumar, because it's now called speckled. So there's a problem of chazazis, of having blisters, and that problem applies when it's on the majority of the esrog. And I should emphasize, obviously, we're not talking about little bumps that are part of the esrog. That's part of the beauty of the esrog. We're talking about a blister that like sticks out, protrudes from those regular bumps of the esrog. So if it's on one place, if it's on the minority of the esrog, that would be kosher. But if they're on a few different places, 2 or 3 places, so then it's considered menumer. It has a problem of being speckled, and it's going to be invalid. Amar Rava says, al choitmayin, on the nose of the esrog, which are different opinions of what that means, but on a very simple level, it means the upper third of the esrog. So on the choitem, Rashi says the oive goivhoi shemashapea misham v'yered letzad reishai. The thickness of its height, where it starts getting smaller towards the top. So that would be towards the top of the esrog, where it starts bending in. So that's called the choitem, according to Rashi. And that if you have blisters on that area, vafilu b'mashahu nami puzzle, even a mashahu, a blister that's just a small blister, it is also puzzle. It's invalid, and the reason is because it's much more visible there than other areas. A person puts that is where a person sees much faster. Their eyes are attracted to that upper part. It's visible. It's much more outright. It's much more visible to the eye. So because of that, the choitem has a much more strict laws. One of them is regarding chazazis, that the chazazis, if it has this blister, it's a problem. Now, the interesting thing about this Gemara is that it talks about 2 or 3 places. If you have blisters on 2 or 3 places, then even though it's not majority of the esrog, it's going to be invalid. So why does it say 2 or 3? If it has it in 2 places, is it invalid? So then just say 2. If it needs to have 3, so then what are you saying 2? 2 or 3 places does seem like it's not clarifying what the halach is. Why? What does it mean 2 or 3? So it's of course, a topic of a lot of discussion in the commentaries, and different understandings of what it means by saying these this idea.
The same question as al pishnei edim and al pishloisha edim.
Yeah, except that over there, the Mishnah asks in Miskayema says Bishnayim Lama Parlucha Kasav Shloisha. Over there it says, the Mishnah is specifically right. The Mishnah asked the question. Here we just leave it vague. Rav said it, and he just leaves it vague. So here it creates more of a problem, and it would be nice if he explained it himself. We would know what he meant, but. One understanding is that it has to have some sufficient space in between. If it just had two, you would think that it's right near each other, and you would think, oh, even if it's 2 separate places, because you have a chuta saira in between, it's already invalid. You have a little one strand that's not blistered, you would think that's fine. So he says no. That 2 or 3, he adds the word 3 to emphasize that you need the same amount of space that you would have between the first blisters and the third blisters. You need that same amount of space in between the first and the second. So it has to be more of a substantial space in between these 2 spots. Otherwise, we're going to call it like 1 area, not 2. It doesn't tell us how much, but he says that 2 or 3 means that it has to be a little spread out, not just in one area. That's one commentary wants to understand it that way. And there is a another interpretation that even if the chazazis is in 3 places, it has to be spread out in the majority. So what he's basically adding is that sometimes even 3 are not going to be invalid. It's only if it reaches the majority of the esrog, which means that there's empty space. It's not like blisters are covering over the entirety of the esrog, but rather that the blisters are in areas that are separated from each other to the extent that if you made a triangle between these areas, you would end up covering the majority of the esrog. So that would be the reason why it has to say 2 or 3, that sometimes 3 is also not invalid. It's all about covering the majority of the esrog, that we have to consider it that it's majority, because we sort of like draw a line to make it a majority. And then there's other interpretations that that it just means even if it's in a lot of spaces, 2, 3, and even many. Sometimes it just uses that term 2 or 3. It basically means more than one. It's considered that it's menumer and it's puzzle. Anyway, maybe 1 or 2 other interpretations, but I'll just say one other one, and that is that 2 or 3 is emphasizing that 2 is obviously better than 3 if you only have 2 esrogim. So if it has 2 blisters versus 3, you would use the one with 2 instead of the one with 3. This is the sameach. Hadar is not something that's the fact that it has to be beautiful. You only have 2 esrogim. One has 2 blisters, the one has 3. You should use the one with 2 because, at least relative to what you have, that's what you should use. It's an interesting way of explaining why it says 2 or 3. But the simple reading of the Gemara is that if it's on 2 or 3 places, if you add, you have to sort of draw this circle around it, or this triangle, to these different places, and it ends up it covers the majority of the esrog. So how much are the actual blisters covering? It's a minority, but if you put a triangle to where the 3 blisters are, or a circle, or however they're situated, if you would, if that would cover the majority of the esrog, that would be a problem. And it works both ways, whether it's the horizontal or the vertical. If it's majority of the esrog, it will ruin it. There is one opinion that wants to say no, actually saying even if it's on a minority of the esrog, 2 or 3 ruins it. It's menumer. And so that's another way of learning this Gemara. Again, it's a topic of discussion. It ends up being a difference in halacha, but this is broad in the Svarim that talk about the esrog. They do show pictures where you have 3 dots or something, on 3 black dots, and you actually make a triangle, and you see if it covers the majority of the esrog. If it's not on the upper area, but it's on the lower area, you go by this. So it is broad in halacha, not normally regarding blisters, normally regarding the black dots, which but in any event, this is it is a topic of discussion in the commentaries, how to calculate this this law of 2 or 3 spots, that it's going to make it invalid. Okay, so then we have Rava's statement that it goes by the choitim. And of course, the choitim is another topic of discussion, that where is the choitim of the esrog? So we mentioned Rashi. Rashi says that it goes by where the esrog starts its slope. Where the esrog starts its slope, that is the nose of the esrog, and anything on top of that is much more strict. And here we're talking about the chazazis. If it's on top, that would be a problem. it would make the esrog invalid. It's much more visible there, and it would be invalid. Now, another interpretation of chaitim could mean, the Ritva says it means the actual, like the where the area where the pitum comes out of. That's called the chaitim. The Rambam holds the actual pitum is the chaitim, the pitum, the top little piece. So there are different opinions as to the chaitim, but the common understanding, and from what I remember reading in the esrog books, it generally is like the like the top third, or where the esrog starts its slope. Okay, so anyway, but there are different opinions as to what it means, the chaitim, and now we're going to continue with the next piece, the next Gemara. So the next Gemara is Nidla Pitmasai. What happens if the pitum was removed? And we saw in the Mishnah was a little vague what it means the pitum was removed. Does it mean the entire pitum? Does it mean the shoshanta, which is like the scab on top of the pitum? And the Mishnah didn't really clarify. It just said the pitum is removed, it's invalid. And then the opposite case was if the uketz is removed, it's valid. The uketz was the stem on the bottom. Yes, Mordechai.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about the end of the esrog breaking off, because 3 times a day after davening, we say Al Tira Mi Pacha Pita.
Very cute. Okay, so the Gemara says Nidla Pitmasai, if the pitum was taken off, it's puzzle, it's invalid. That was the Mishnah, and now the Gemara says Tana, Rabbi Yitzchok ben Elazar. Rabbi Yitzchok ben Elazar taught Nitla Buchnasai. The Buchna was taken off. Now, what is Rabbi Yitzchok? What is he saying? So, one way of understanding this is he's saying that the Mishnah says pitum, and he said the word Buchna, and he called it a pestle. That's what he calls it, and he says that's what it means. That it's because the pitum is similar to to a buchna, to a pestle, when mortar and pestle, where they would crush herbs or things, and they would use that some type of I guess it was earthenware, and it was round, a little round on the bottom. I don't know. It was, then they would break things, they break herbs, break up, crush things with it. So that is similar to the pitum of the
Sounds like the shoshanta to me.
Oh, so there's different opinions, understanding of what he's saying. So Rashi brings, let's just read Rashi inside. The bottom Rashi, not the bottom Rashi, it's the third to last Rashi on the page, 35b. Rashi says, Tani Rabbi Yitzchok bar Elazar, Nidla Bichnasai. So he says, Rabbi Yitzchok ben Elazar teaches, it's talking about that the Buchna, that he taught it, or he learned it, that it was Nidla Bichnasai, not Nidla Pitmasai, but Nidla Buchnasai. The pestle was taken off. B'masnisei havatani lahai Nidla Pitmasai. In the Mishnah, in his Mishnah, he would teach that this statement of Nidla Pitmasai, he would teach it Buchnasai. The pestle was taken off. Levishu chad, because it's sharp. V'asui kumin buchna, it's made like a buchna, like a pestle. I'm not sure what he means sharp chad. To me, that's a little surprising that he uses that word, because a pestle is not sharp; it's rounded, as far as I know. But maybe means more like hard. Maybe it's strong. I don't know. But Zaloshan Meiri Hazakin Rabbeinu Yaakov. This is the way my teacher Rabbeinu Yaakov taught it. Aval Rabbeinu Yitzchok Halevi hayamafarish, but Rabbi Yitzchok Halevi would translate it. Pitmasai v'uktzai shnehem bezanav. He translated that the pitum and the uketz are both by the tail of the esrog. Now this is surprising to all of us, because we normally know the pitum is on the top, right? Well, guess what? Rabbeinu Yitzchok Halevi learns that the pitum is on the bottom. It's by the stem. They're both by uktzai shenita lauketz ha'etz Masha chutz leguma. The ukitz is the stem on the bottom. That the eitz, the wood that was out, that the stem that's sticking out of the whole of the esrog is, if it's the uktzai, if the uktzai is removed, that's the end part of our Mishnah. It meant that the shenitel ha'etz masha chutz leguma means that the wooden part that's outside of the whole of the esrog, the way an esrog works is that it's almost like a wine bottle. You know how a wine bottle, they make it with a little indention on the bottom of a wine bottle. At least in the older wine bottles, they used to have a little indention there. And the reason was because you would pour it with a holder, so there would be something sticking in to latch on, to hold on to that wine bottle. So the wine bottles used to have a little indention on the bottom. So an esrog also has an indention in the bottom, and that's where the stem grows out of. So it's like a little hole there. And the stem that grows out of there, there's two parts to it. There's the part that sticks totally out of the esrog, and then there's the part of the stem that's actually in the inside area of the esrog that comes down. The esrog comes down to the bottom, but there's a little area of indention inside that. The part of the stem that's inside the airspace of the esrog, that's a different halacha. So there's the stem that sticks out of the esrog airspace, and then there's the stem that's inside of the esrog airspace, both on the bottom. So he says the ukitz is what sticks out of the esrog airspace. That's kosher. That's the end of the Mishnah. Pit masa is shenitla she'ukitz mitoicha esrog v'chosroi. That the area that's in the airspace, it fell out or was removed. The ukitz from the inside of the esrog, and it was removed. It's puzzle. V'hainu detani Reb Yitzchok bar Elazar nitla buchnasai. That's not the way Reb Yitzchok is. Our Gemara is trying to say that the buchna was removed. What's nichnas b'soicha esrog, what's inside the airspace of the esrog, kibuchna hanichnasu maka ba'asisa, like the pestle that bangs and enters inside the mortar. That's exactly what the case is with the esrog. You have the stem that enters the airspace of the esrog. It's similar to a pestle that's sticking inside the mortar. If that comes out, that's the pitum. And if the whole ukitz comes out, it's going to be invalid. So that's the way Rabbeinu Yitzchok Halevi learns. The Lashon Rabbeinu Yaakov nearly, but I think Rabbeinu Yaakov, his pshat is right, because Shalom Matzino b'chol makom pitma ukitz. We never find in any place that the pitum means the stem on the bottom. The pitum always means the stem on top, the part that protrudes on top. So Rashi doesn't like this pshat of Rabbeinu Yitzchok Halevi, but he does mention it, that there is such a pshat that is talking about. So the bottom line is this might be a difference in halacha, that according to Rabbeinu Yitzchok Halevi, what happens if that entire stem is removed? Normally, when you buy an esrog, what do you buy? You buy the stem sticking out on the bottom a little, at least it's a little sticking out. What happens if it's missing? If the stem is cut out very close to the esrog itself, and it's missing some of the stem that's supposed to be in the airspace? According to Rabbi Yitzchok Halevi, it would seem that would be called nitla pidmasai. The pitum is removed. Definitely, if the whole ukitz, if the whole stem is removed, that would be a problem. That would mean that it would be invalid. It's called nitma pitmasi of our Mishnah. Possibly even if part of it was removed, if you have some of the airspace of the esrog that doesn't have the full stem, according to him, it seems like that might be a puzzle, an invalid esrog. It's nitla pitmasi. The Mishnah said it's invalid. But if the ukitz came out, according to him, that means just the outer area, so you could cut the. So the question is, where are you supposed to cut the esrog from the tree? According to Rabbi Yitzchok Halevi, it's a very serious thing. You got to make sure to cut it when it's not in the airspace of the esrog, but after it protrudes from the airspace of the esrog out, that's where you cut the stem off. Because if you cut it inside, you could invalidate the esrog possibly. That's called according to him. But
how about you? You want me to do a
yes,
screen? You want me to do a screen picture? I think I did this before, where you can show the pieces in the photo.
Okay, yeah. Okay, fine. Okay, yeah. We'll conclude with this.
Oh, if you're doing pictures, maybe you can do a movie.
Right there.
Okay, but that's not a good picture. I'll
No,
tell you
'cause
why.
we want the bottom part.
I want the bottom part to be the way an esrog is supposed to be, that that there's an indent. This is one of the esrogim that don't have the common character of an esrog. That common character of an esrog is that there's an indent on the bottom, and so the stem is sticking out from an indention inside the bottom. So it's not a perfect picture, but Mitzvah Hashem, maybe we'll find a better picture
Wait,
tomorrow.
that's not a
So-
perfect ukitz?
No, because you want one of the signs of an esrog is that it goes in. I'm not saying it's a puzzle esrog, but I'm saying this is definitely not the ideal because it's one
Yeah,
of the
but
signs
if you saw a better picture from the bottom, you would see it's going into the yellow of the esrig.
Yeah, this
That
looks
it
like
is.
Yeah, but it's very minimal in this one.
I
Only on
I
one
bel-
side, even. It's only on one side. Look, the other side definitely protrudes. Maybe on the on the
Well,
right side.
if you look at it bottom, top to the bottom, I'll find
Yeah.
pictures. I'll find
Yeah.
pictures.
Okay. Zygons
It's
on
a
everyone.
big
Have a wonderful
internet.
day. Thank you.
Zygazun.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rebbe.
Okay.
Thank you.